The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 25th chapter. Jesus is continuing to teach in parables to those who have gathered around him. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, "Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, "Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, "Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours." But his master replied, "You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. We are fully in that time of the year when, quite frankly, as we hear the scriptures, that Zephaniah reading, and even this gospel reading, where the response at the end of the reading is, "Thanks be to God, but I'm not quite sure I want to." Right? These are hard readings. And sometimes I think that it's important to know where one is going, to know what to do. I suspect that for the football team at Boone Central Schools right now, that has been true for the past week or so. They know that they're going to go play that state championship game. They know that they are playing a major rival in Norfolk Catholic. They know they are going to Lincoln, to Memorial Stadium, to that place that, well, in Nebraska, it's kind of the high sanctuary of the state. And so knowing all of that, the coaches and the players, well, they know what to do. The coaches and players have been reviewing the film. The coaches and players have been reviewing their previous experiences and meeting with this other team. The coaches and players have been looking ahead and planning and strategizing and preparing so that when they get there, They are ready. Perhaps the same is true as reading Matthew's gospel, particularly in these last days of the church year. Sometimes we need to know where we're going to know what to do. Jesus is in those final days of his ministry. It's after what we call Palm Sunday and that procession. It is in a time when he has been kind of poking a stick in the eye of the leadership of the synagogue and the temple. He's been stirring things up in a variety of ways, and people have been asking questions like, by what authority do you do these things? And he has been challenging them in the way things are. And in these last days, there's now a crowd gathered around him. And that community, well, it includes people who are so incredibly happy that he's there. And there are also people who want to do him in. Jesus is offering up images of the kingdom of heaven. And in this current run of stories, Jesus is building a heightened sense of expectation, a heightened sense of urgency. And Matthew is explicitly challenging all who hear to live according to this kingdom of heaven. Just where are we going? Well, next Sunday is Christ the King Sunday. It's the final Sunday of the church year. That's kind of the destination. And on that day, what we hear is Jesus telling another story. Some call it a parable. Others say, no, this is more of a prophecy. In this prophecy, in this parable, the church hears the ultimate challenge. And in that challenge, Jesus tells the people who have gathered around that the kingdom of heaven is like a king who is like a shepherd. And this shepherd comes and is separating sheep and goats. You may remember this story that the king comes, and as he separates the sheep and the goats, he says to the goats, you haven't taken care of business. You haven't fed the hungry. You haven't given drink to the thirsty. You have not clothed the naked. You have not walked with and accompanied the sick. You have not visited the imprisoned. And then he turns to the sheep. And he says, you have. And in each case, the sheep and the goats say, when did we not? Or when did we? And he said, whenever you took care of any of these, the least among you, it is as though you did it for me. In this series, in this progression, this journey of stories, Jesus is building a sense of urgency to keep awake, to be prepared, to consider what you do with what you have been given. The challenge is that we would really rather prefer to cleanse Jesus of all this judgment language. You've heard people say, oh, that's so judgy. We want God's grace. And yet, there are ways in which we want that grace to come without really affecting our lives, without challenging us to change or make demands on us. Matthew does not let us off the hook so easily. God's grace, God's forgiveness, God's reconciling love, God's work for a new creation is an absolutely free gift. It comes without any effort or merit of our part. And yet, having received this gift, each and every one of us is empowered with the ability to respond. We are freed. We are freed from all those things that bind us, all those things that would turn us away from our relationship with God. We are freed from our sin. And at the very same time, we are freed for love and service and care for those who are the least among us. The call is to pay attention to those who the larger world would too easily say, you know, we don't need to pay attention to them. They're the ones who are easy to neglect. Some would say they aren't worthy of it. So today the urgency takes a difficult turn. See, we hear the story of this wealthy landowner who distributes his wealth among his slaves. Some want to make sure that we point out that a talent is a measure of gold, but one talent is roughly the equivalent of about 15 years' wages. So do the math quick. What would it be like for you to receive 5 of those? A lifetime's wages, and to be entrusted with it. Or 2, for pity's sake, 1. And this wealthy landowner hands over these. Now the first two slaves act foolishly. You see, anyone in the first century would recognize that they're going and trading with this. They're going and risking it was a dangerous gambit. But the gambit pays off. They double the money. And so they find themselves in the good graces of their master, in the good graces of their Lord. You know, in our culture, we really love that image, don't we? That notion that, yes, they went and they risked, and for the risk they came out well. And then they received blessing. It fits with our cultural story so well. And yet, so does the rest of the story. You see, there's a problem. For the first century hearer, the wise one is that third slave. He does what's prudent. It's the equivalent today of taking that talent and putting it in a CD or under the mattress. There is not much return, if any, but it's safe. It protects the wealth. And he gets slammed, gets jammed, gets judged. In fact, this slave gets cast out of the Lord's presence. You heard it. Weeping, gnashing of teeth. You see, for the first hearers, this story that Jesus is telling is a cruel affirmation that the world economy crushes the least among us. Wealth, in their experience, is always built on the backs of the little ones. And that bit about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, well, it spoke an incredibly difficult truth. And this is the place where, as we hear these parables, it's so easy to start using them and hearing them as an allegory where we start to assign characters. Who's me? Who's God? But the difficulty in this is that if we hear that God is this landowner, what does that tell us about who God is? That God is one who takes somebody who is among the least and crushes them, casts them out of God's presence. I wonder if this isn't actually a setup for the story that is going to come next. A story where the Lord says, through a king who is a shepherd who separates goats and sheep, what you have done to the least of these, you have done to me. So, what is it? What is it that you are doing with the grace, with the love, with the forgiveness and the new life that God has given you? Yes, there will be judgment. And for those who choose to see God as one who participates in crushing the little ones, well, that judgment is their own judgment upon themselves. You see, I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps this story is intended to be a critique of the way the world moves. And having critiqued that, we hear what's next: the kingdom of heaven. Jesus turns it all upside down, ultimately. And the ones worthy of care and concern aren't the ones that are easy to love or care for, or the ones who are easy to see as blessed because they have so much, but rather the ones who are worthy are the ones who are too easily neglected in our economy. And where we are going in all of this, where Jesus is leading us, is to a new way of being where those who are the least are cared for, where grace is extended, where love is expressed in deeds of compassion, where forgiveness is announced in acts of reconciliation, where new life emerges. In short, the way forward is following Christ. The way forward is following Christ through death into resurrection life.